What's going on, everybody? He's John McKechnie. I'm Nick Whalen. We're talking best bets for Week 11 in the National Football League. John, a couple weeks ago, Week 9, it was a favorites every week. Week 10, not so much. The complete opposite. In Week 9, we saw favorites go 14-1 straight up, 10-5 against the number. Week 10, it was a dog week, man. Dogs went 11-3 against the spread, 6 outright victories. Things really started with that early morning game on Sunday where we saw the Carolina Panthers take down the Giants. You had a nice week with your best bets, particularly the call on the biblical beatdown in that Eagles-Cowboys game. You also hit your lock of the week with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I got burned by the Niners just about everywhere. But we'll talk about that team later on. But props were solid. Our unders parlay hit last week. We'll have another one of those coming for you in Week 11. But John, we have one situation that we want to discuss here. One of the biggest lines of the season. The Detroit Lions are as high as 14-point favorites at some books right now. How do you tend to approach a game like this?
Right. And you were just talking about the perils of trend watching, right? Where, Week 9, huge week for the favorites, and then it flips. Things just don't always stay static in the world of NFL betting. But another trend is kind of staring us in the face when it comes to looking at this big number this week for the Detroit Lions. Thus far, home favorites of 10.5 points this year. There haven't been that many of them. So we're working off of a pretty small sample to begin with. All 4 of them have covered, though. One of them being the Detroit Lions when they pasted the Tennessee Titans just a few weeks back. But to quickly run through the sample, Niners 10.5-point favorites over the Patriots. They covered that one, winning by 17. The Commanders completely waxed the Panthers a few weeks back. Sans Jaden Daniels. The Panthers were also on the other side of one against the Broncos. That was the closest to covering of the big underdogs thus far. They lost by 14. They were underdogs by 13 against the Broncos. So, again, 4-0 are teams that are favored by this much. We're looking at a sketchy situation at quarterback for the Jags once again, and the Lions. I mean, it was dicey for them, no question, last week in Houston, but they are resilient as it gets. They found a way to win on the road against those crazy Battle Reds. So, a lot of respect to the Lions there. I tend to think that they take care of business here. They're at home. To me right now, playoffs, different discussion, of course, when you're bringing up Patrick Mahomes. But right now, the best team in football is the Detroit Lions. They're not going to mess around against the Jaguars this week, I don't think.
I think they got their messing around out of the way last week against Houston, right? And I think that's the mark of a good team. Maybe a lucky team in some ways to survive a game like that where Jared Goff throws 5 interceptions. It just feels like everything is going against you, and you still rally back and win that game on a field goal against Houston, a pretty decent Houston team. So, yeah, I agree with you on this one. I mean, sometimes you see a number like this and you're just like, man, I want to stay away. It's too high. You got to remember, there is a reason that the Lions are 14-point favorites. This is the biggest number in favor of Detroit, by the way, since they played the Jaguars in the Jaguars' first season in the NFL. That's how far back you got to go to find a Lions game that matches this. But where do you find an advantage for Jacksonville? I still think this has been maybe a slightly underrated defense, specifically against the run. They can get some push there, but saying that they have a sketchy quarterback situation might be putting it nicely. I mean, it's Mac Jones. Trevor Lawrence is not going to play in this game. And not only that, but Tank Bigsby is banged up. Brian Thomas is banged up. Gabe Davis is banged up. All those guys have been limited in practice this week. Every single guard on their roster is also on the injury report right now. Josh Hines-Allen popped up on the injury report. Tyson Campbell is banged up. I mean, there is very little evidence to support that the Jaguars should hang around in this game.
Yeah, I'm just not seeing it. I think, like you said, the Lions just kind of have a distinct advantage at every single position group here. The injuries certainly not helping when it comes to Jacksonville. So, it's eye-popping, and we haven't seen too many numbers like this all year, even over 10.5. But in this particular instance, I'm going to go ahead, lay the wood.
All right, there we have it. Detroit, by far the biggest favorite on the board. No other line is in danger of closing anywhere near double digits right now. We do have the Dolphins up to 7.5 at BetMGM over the Raiders, and the Houston Texans are a 7.5-point favorite on the road at Dallas this week. But that's it as far as the touchdown plus spreads go. John, let's get to the board. As always, I'll let you lead us off. Where are you taking us first?
I will lead us off with the Browns and Saints game. Before I do that, I will mention the biblical call from a week ago. That's 2 years in a row in which I've kind of called something to that extent, and both of them involved the Eagles, oddly enough. I actually had the Niners going into Philly last year and getting after them, and I think I put an alt spread in the parlay last year, and that came through. So I don't know what – I have a cosmic connection with the Eagles of some sort.
Yeah. You always have.
Right. But unrelated to this game, again, we're talking Browns, we're talking Saints, kind of split action as far as where you can find the number. Some places the Browns are favored, some places the Saints are favored. Those type of games always kind of catch my eye. I think it's important to note that the Browns aren't kind of catching the live wire, kind of similar to the Ravens going into Cleveland a few weeks ago, post the Jameis change, where it's like there's just a lot up in the air right now. And there could be that 1 week bit of momentum that's captured. And I think that the Falcons stepped into that trap a week ago, going into New Orleans with the Rizzler as the new coach.
That's right.
The Falcons just did what they do and blew it. Just as we were almost getting ready to trust them. But I think it is important that the Browns are off the bye. I know Kevin Stefanski hasn't necessarily been great against the spread coming off the bye. I think he's 1-3 against the number coming off of the bye. The Saints, they've covered 2 games at home this year. One of them was the Panthers. One of them was last week. So I'm not putting a ton of stock into that. And they're still 2-3 overall. I still don't find them to have a huge home field advantage. Carr's been terrible against the spread after a win, 29-41-1, according to the Action Network. And I would say, if I was a donkey that talked about revenge games, don't check the tapes that I've ever done that before. But I wouldn't say that about Jameis Winston here. Jameis doesn't have any sort of hate in his heart, I don't think. So that's not a factor for me here. I just think that the Browns, well-rested, coming into this game, I think that they are the better team than the Saints. And the Saints, they got their dead cat bounce already a week ago. They come back to earth this week.
You said it right there. They've used up the post Dennis Allen bounce. They got that last week against Atlanta. The Falcons predictably threw that game away, right? It was such a obvious flat spot, I think, for the Atlanta Falcons. And I walked right into that trap thinking that they could just out-talent the New Orleans Saints. And certainly they did not do that. Atlanta, by the way, did put up 468 yards of offense on this Saints defense. I mean, this is just such an Atlanta type of game where you dominate every statistic and just can't finish it off. I mean, the Saints were begging the Falcons to win that game late after the Kamara drop, and Kirk Cousins said no thank you. So I'm with you on this, John. This one was on my honorable mention list. I do like the Browns, especially if you can get a point and a half here. I mean, who knows? In a game like this, that point and a half could very well matter, but don't mind hopping on the Browns money line either. I will jump to a derivative play that I have on this game, John. I'm going with the under 44.5 in Browns Saints. And we got to keep in mind the Saints, this defense is shaky, I think, to say the least. You trade away Marshawn Lattimore, that certainly doesn't help, but they just held what's ultimately a good Falcons offense to 17 points. Both of these teams are very turnover prone. I think we could see a lot of yards, specifically on the Cleveland side, if Jameis is firing on all cylinders with that passing game. I also think we could see 2 or 3 drives that end with an interception and no points. That's basically how we hit the under in that Browns-Chargers game a few weeks ago. Browns were moving the ball, but they couldn't finish off drives because Jameis is throwing picks. Saints went over their first 2 games of the year. They have been an over team for the most part this season, but they've been a completely different team since then. I mean, they were basically hitting the over by themselves early in the year, putting up those 40-plus point games. This offense is no longer capable of that. I think if this is going to be as close of a game as the number would indicate, I think it's played, maybe in the high teens, maybe in the low 20s. It could be a 21-20 type of game. I don't necessarily trust either of these offenses. It should be perhaps a decent spot for the Browns to finally get this running game going. We were all excited about Nick Chubb coming back. He's just been woefully inefficient. This has not been a good offensive line. They just haven't been able to get anything going on the ground. If they can, I think that's a good thing for the under. I think that means we're burning more clock. You're not necessarily worried about those big plays from Jameis Winston. And again, you have 2 turnover-prone teams going at it. So even if we see ball movement on either side, I'm not sure we see a ton of those drives result in touchdowns. So I will take the under 44.5.
There we go. Yeah, this one is going to be ugly as sin. It's going to be gross, but we're playing in the mud this week. That's all right.
We are. John, speaking of the mud, you got another game with a tight spread that you're looking at.
I am. So I am looking at the Bengals-Chargers game. I believe this is the Sunday nighter. Joe Burrow, 19-10 against the spread as an underdog. I mean, they were so close last week on that Thursday night game. They'll get a little bit of an extended rest here as they head out to LA. He's 14-6. Joe Burrow is as a road underdog. He is also, according to the Action Network, the best against the spread quarterback after a loss other than Jared Goff in recent years. So that comes into play here. I think that the under makes some sense here as well. I think that, we see the inflated number. We see two great quarterbacks going at it, and we're looking at 48 and a half points. I could see that going under just a bit. So I think that might be the safer one. But, I feel like I'm a broken record saying that this is the week that the Bengals need to get themselves on track. They basically are, I've said it before, out of margin for error. That's even more true now. They absolutely need this one. I think Joe Burrow and company find a way to get this done. I'm going to take them on the money line a little bit later, but if you're stopping short of that, I do like the Bengals plus 1.5 here.
Yeah, I'm on the Bengals as well. This one is not going to make the card because I do think it's really difficult, and I want to know about T. Higgins and Orlando Brown as well. Both have been limited throughout the week in practice, and I don't know what's going on with T. Higgins, man. I mean, should have just put him on IR at this point. If they get T. Higgins back, I think this is a game that the Cincinnati Bengals can and should win, even on the road. It's not going to be a monster home field advantage by any means for the Chargers. I also want to extend a thank you to the NFL schedule makers. We are very grateful that this game has been flexed into the Sunday night spot. It was supposed to be Colts-Jets, by the way. So thank goodness we made that decision a couple of weeks ago. This will be a banger of a Sunday night game. You mentioned the total, John. That's my favorite play here. I love the under in this game. I mean, the Chargers have not had a total north of 45. I don't even think they've hit 45 in any total so far this year. So this is a very un-Chargers-like total. It kind of depends on how you think the style of this game will be played. Like I don't, the Chargers don't want to play a shootout, but I don't know that they're incapable of it. Like I absolutely love what I'm seeing from Justin Herbert week to week. I think he is playing as well as just about any quarterback in the NFL. The problem is they're only asking him to throw the ball like 18 to 25 times. So we're not seeing the numbers necessarily. He doesn't have the weapons, but I think he is playing at a high level. And if this does turn into more of a Cincinnati script and it's played in the high 20s or the low 30s, I wouldn't be surprised if the Chargers find a way to keep up, especially against that shaky Cincinnati secondary. But nonetheless, I think that the numbers strongly push us in favor of an under here as far as the Chargers, who for the most part have been able to dictate pace in these games this season. They drag teams into the mud with them. Let's see where we want to go next year, John. I'm going to take us to Chicago. We're heading north. I'm going to take the Green Bay Packers as a 5.5 point favorite on the road at the Bears. So some shocking statistics here on the Chicago Bears. They are 8-21 against the number in division since 2019. Road favorites coming off of a bye, i.e. the Green Bay Packers this week, are 76-51-4 against the spread since 2004. So we got a pretty large sample there. The Bears have lost 19 straight road games straight up when those road games are played on a Sunday. Just a preposterous stat. I had no idea that was the case. I knew they struggled on the road. I didn't know it was that bad. The Chicago Bears, as you know, John, fired their offensive coordinator this week, Shane Waldron. If you're the Packers, I don't think you want that. You'd probably rather face Shane Waldron. I think there's a case to be made that any change is going to be a positive change for Chicago, given how bad this offense has been the last couple of weeks. But who's taken over? It's Thomas Brown. It's the architect of that vaunted 2023 Carolina Panthers offense. And there's so much wrong with this Bears offense right now. It's not like there's just one quick fix. Installing someone like Thomas Brown, yeah, it's probably a slight upgrade in the short term over Shane Waldron, but can you fix all that? Can you install, new terminology, whatever you need to change over the course of 4 or 5 days leading up to this game against Green Bay, coming off a bye with a good defense? I don't think so. So I think by default, we see a better effort from Chicago's offense. They literally can't be worse than they have been the last couple of weeks, but this is one where I think Green Bay can commit a couple mistakes. Maybe they could struggle a little bit early in this game. If they just play like a B plus game, I think that's enough to win by a touchdown.
Yeah, it's a friendly number here for the Packers, given everything that's going on with the Bears. I mean, the wheels are falling off in pretty insane fashion. Thomas Brown, former staffer, I believe, at the University of Georgia.
And Wisconsin.
RotoWire's, that's right. Wisconsin ombudsman Chris Benzine, I think, rubbed my face in it that they'd gotten Thomas Brown or something many, many years ago. But regardless, the firing of Waldron is akin to, like the old cliche, the moving of the deck chairs on the Titanic. We know that this is an Eberflus lame duck situation for all intents and purposes. They're terrible against the Packers. They're terrible against the division. That's probably the most killer part if you're a Bears fan. It's just even when you win games, it's never against your divisional rivals. So it's just you're constantly kind of locked in for 6 weeks of pain out of every season, basically regardless of who's back there at quarterback. Caleb Williams obviously not playing particularly good football right now. I don't think that changes against a pretty opportunistic Packers defense here. So everything's kind of pointing me in the direction of Green Bay as well.
Yeah, just a couple more disgusting stats about this Bears offense that I need to get off my chest. Since winning in London against Jacksonville, that was like a month ago. So they played 3 games since then. The Bears have converted 6 of 40 third downs. 6 of 40. They were 1 of 14 on third down last week against New England. They finished that game at 3.4 yards per play. That was the second lowest yards per play game of the season. Giants against Philly 3 or 4 weeks ago. That was the worst offensive game we've seen. But the Bears have accounted for the 2nd, 4th, and 6th lowest YPP games of the year. I mean, you really can't overstate when this offense is not rolling. I mean, it just gives them nothing. It gives them absolutely nothing, right? I mean, it becomes literally the worst offense in the NFL. So again, I think we see a slight bump by default because you can't be as bad as you were last week. But I think this is a Packers team coming in healthy that takes care of business. John, for your final game, we're going to the game of the week.
We are going to the game of the week. So that, of course, is Jets versus Colts. No, sorry. It is Chiefs versus Bills. This one up in Buffalo. You can look up any stat basically about Patrick Mahomes and how he performs as an underdog. It's a small sample, unsurprisingly, but he's been dominant. He even gets a lot of straight up wins in those particular setups. 17-7 straight up as an underdog, according to the Action Network. So just he's the boogeyman. Pure and simple. And I think last week was kind of the last straw for me that maybe the Chiefs just do go undefeated this year. I mean, to block that field goal in the absolute most important point of that game, you're literally, if you don't block that field goal, you lose. They find a way to block it. That defense is just so nasty, and the offense is able to do just enough. I think that the offense generally is ticking up. The DeAndre Hopkins addition, they're still able to run the ball pretty well. They got to avoid the fumbles and everything like that, especially in a hostile road environment such as this. And this is not taking anything away from Buffalo. I definitely agree with the spread where Buffalo should be favored in this particular setup. I think Buffalo's played extremely well, better than my expectations this year, but I just can't go against the Chiefs here getting points. So I'm going to ride Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs +2.
This is just default Chiefs for me too. Like you said, it's tough to look at how the Chiefs have played specifically the last couple of weeks and say, yeah, they're going to go into Buffalo and dominate this game, but it's just what the Chiefs do. And we talked about Detroit kind of having their disaster game and surviving it last week against Houston. I kind of feel the same way about KC. I mean, did not play well. I thought got thoroughly outplayed throughout that game by the Denver Broncos. Still find a way to win. I think it's almost a prophetic type of win, right? Where it's like, all right, maybe this undefeated season is going to happen. And if they get through this Buffalo game unscathed and they move to 10-0, that talk is going to ramp up. They got 2 cupcakes coming up on the schedule the next 2 weeks. And that's going to be a very spicy narrative to follow the rest of the way. We also have some injuries on the Buffalo side here. Like I get why the Bills are favored. They're at home. This game probably means more to them than it does KC. Although I get the sense that Kansas City kind of cares about the undefeated season, right? It's like you got a chance not only to win a 3rd straight Super Bowl, but to really make history here and be the first team to go 17-0 and actually finish it off, right? And I think if there's any team and any coach and quarterback who would care about it, I think it would be the Chiefs and Reed and Mahomes. On the Buffalo side, though, Amari Cooper continues to be limited. He's missed a couple games in a row. We have no idea if he's going to be out there. Dalton Kincaid went out last week. He has not practiced at all this week. I don't think he's going to be out there. And then you look at Keon Coleman, who's already been ruled out for this week. So if they're without Cooper, Kincaid, and Coleman, I think that has to matter. That even if Josh Allen has been the better player by far compared to Mahomes this year, I mean, down 3 key weapons, that's a big deal.
No, it absolutely is. I mean, we talked around the trade deadline of how important it was going to be for Amari Cooper to be introduced to this offense because they had a smattering of wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 types. That's all well and good, but they needed an alpha. And They don't have him this week, at least from the looks of it. I think the Kincaid thing really kind of shortens up their ability to attack that linebacking group. And the Chiefs have actually been bad against tight ends this year. If there is kind of a weak point in that passing defense, so Kincaid could have really been an X factor there. And Coleman was a guy that I was talking with our colleague Brandon Kravitz on his radio show, who's a potential kind of second half of the season league winner. And the way it looked was Keon Coleman was really kind of coming on and figuring things out. And, the addition of Amari Cooper was going to kind of open things up for him. But him being banged up, obviously, is another tough thing. So it's going to be kind of like the Khalil Shakir show a lot through the air. And as good and efficient as he is, I'm not sure that he's that big play component that you really need. And I'm not sure that they're going to be able to run the ball great with James Cook. I do wonder if Ray Davis is going to be an X factor in this one. But all things considered, it's a lot working against Buffalo despite being favored.
All right, it's time for my last game, John. I will tell you, I considered the Indianapolis Colts +4. I loved it when I thought it was going to be Joe Flacco. I don't love it as much now that it's Anthony Richardson. So that is moved into stay away territory. Considered the Niners, considered the Broncos as slight home favorites against Atlanta. But I'm going square here, John. I'm taking the Minnesota Vikings -5.5 on the road at Tennessee. And I think Tennessee is going to end up being a relatively popular side. I know our guy, Adam Thompson, over at Bookies Plus really likes the Titans this week. I get it. Minnesota has looked shaky the last 2 weeks. Sam Darnold, in particular, has looked shaky. But this is yet another game where I look at the Vikings and say, okay, you've had two kind of disaster weeks in a row as far as, against the Colts, it was the interceptions and the missed field goals. Against Jacksonville, it was basically just the interceptions. But the Vikings have outgained their last two opponents, 817 to 380, those being the Colts and the Jaguars. They've won those two games by a combined 13 points. I don't even know how that's possible. I was licking my wounds, after losing on Minnesota last week after that spread moved up to 6.5. In the last 20 years, John, teams that win a game in which they put up over 400 yards, which the Vikings did, and hold the opponent under 150 total yards, which is what the Jaguars did, that team has not won a game by less than 13 points since 2001. Like, those teams dominate under those parameters, and the Vikings somehow found a way to only win that game by 5. I think that comes back around this week. I mean, they've committed 6 turnovers over the last 2 games. I mentioned the 2 missed field goals against Indy. Those were big. I think the Vikings are coming into this game a little bit undervalued. I think they've been the same team. They've been just as dominant. They're just not finishing off drives. They were 0-5 in the red zone against Jacksonville last week. Those things tend to be fluky. They tend to come around week to week. You look at the Titans side of things. Yeah, they took a couple of losses where they were putting up yardage. They had back-to-back 400-plus yard games. That was with Mason Rudolph. We saw that offense regress a bit last week with Will Levis. Levis did not turn the ball over in week 10. I don't think we can count on that again. I think we get at least one Will Levis turnover against this Vikings defense. It's going to be all over him. Titans have been able to run the ball at times this year. Mostly that's come against bad teams. I don't think that happens against Minnesota. If we get Sam Darnold, just settle down a little bit. He can throw 1 pick, but he can't throw 2 or more. And he certainly can't be throwing picks in the end zone. But if Sam Darnold settles in here, I think this is a good spot for Minnesota to remind us that they are a significantly better team than the Tennessee Titans.
What a little scheduling quirk to just get 3 AFC South teams in a row, and they already took care of the Texans early on. So it's like that Grim Reaper meme walking down the hallway, and you've already got the Texans and the Jags and the Colts under your belt. Titans, you're next. I think that this has been a matter of just not finishing those drives, like you were saying when it comes to the Vikings, the Titans. Very turnover prone when Levis is back there. I don't think that he's fixed just based on last week. I think that this is the right time to get back in on Minnesota.
John, let's talk some player props. You and I have been using the RotoWire Picks app. You can go to rotowire.com/picks. You can get all the leans, all the sportsbook comparisons, all the pick'em sites. You can see everything there, all the data that you need to help you out in the prop market this weekend. What do you like for props?
So my own research drew me towards a couple of these. I got a couple of anytime touchdowns, and then I've got a couple that were certainly helped by our picks and props tools. So the anytime touchdowns that I like for this week, I like George Pickens +135. Would like to see that a little bit higher, but +135 at FanDuel against his secondary, I'm good with that. I know that the Ravens safeties in particular are terrible. Kyle Hamilton is banged up right now, so that kind of leans me towards Pat Freiermuth. You can get that at plus 190 at FanDuel. Sticking with the tight ends, like Dalton Schultz, anytime touchdown. It's only plus 215, but not every book has posted their numbers for Monday Night Football yet. So keep an eye, see if there's anything better out there. But even still, about 2-1 for Dalton Schultz, coming off of a strong game last week in terms of the yards. Doesn't have a touchdown just yet, but it's 16 targets over the last 3 weeks. I think that he's getting a lot of usage. Obviously, with the injuries there, Nico Collins coming back could trim that a little bit, but I still think 4 or 5 targets is feasible. Maybe one in the red zone gets us in there for Schultz. I like Brock Purdy. Shout out to the Picks app for that one. Over 254.5 passing yards for him. I like Audric Estime under. I got to end it on a sour note here. I'm sorry. Under 58.5 over at BetMGM. That's higher than Kenneth Walker. That's higher than Brian Robinson. It's higher than James Cook and Aaron Jones. I know like the fantasy intelligentsia is kind of excited about the prospect of Estime taking over that Denver backfield. I think it's a fool's errand. I think they still kind of mix and match in that backfield. I like the under 58.5 for Estime.
I think that's a really good call on Estime because I don't think it's a guarantee that he just walks into this job, right? I mean, we thought Javonte Williams was still the no doubt starter going into last week, and all of a sudden he carries once. So yeah, a bit of an inflated number on Estime. I think trying to capitalize on some of that excitement. I'm looking at a Calvin Ridley anytime touchdown in that Minnesota game. If the Titans are going to score, it feels like it's going to be Calvin Ridley. He had 2 touchdowns a week ago. He's seen his target share jump immensely since the DeAndre Hopkins trade. And really the price is what drew me here. Plus 245 for a Calvin Ridley touchdown. I like a Nick Chubb touchdown this week against the New Orleans Saints. Again, this is not a good run defense. I think if there's ever a spot for the Browns to get this ground game going, to kind of get a feel-good score going for Nick Chubb, it could be this week. Jonathan Taylor, anytime touchdown. If Anthony Richardson is your starting quarterback, you need to win this game on the ground. Jets' run defense has been horrendous, by the way. This defense continues to regress week to week, but they are getting run all over these last couple of weeks. And most recently, it was James Conner and the Cardinals doing that. So I like Jonathan Taylor to find the end zone. Will Dissly, anytime touchdown, John, plus 310. Will Dissly continues to draw targets from Justin Herbert every single week. He has really separated himself. They have this group of like random white tight ends, and you never really know who's who. But Will Dissly has kind of become the guy over the last few weeks, and we think we could see points in that Cincinnati in Chargers game. And I mean, honestly, Will Dissly has been like a top 2 favorite target for Justin Herbert.